And we should now get on to getting back to Menasseh ben Yisrael. Menasseh ben Yisrael had around this time, he had become convinced, or more convinced than ever, that the lost 10 tribes were amongst the Amerindians in Mexico, in Ecuador, in Peru, and all that region. And America had been discovered in 1492, but it took time before people got in there. Explorers went there, and settlers came there, and it was people. Many of the people were quite sophisticated, quite learned, but they're also primitive. In other words, they knew much less than we know now, and they were subject to all kinds of rumors and superstitions and ideas. And there were all kinds of claims that the Indians in America had practiced Jewish customs, such as the Jubilee year, all kinds of things that were superficially similar to the Jewish Old Testament practices, as well as pagan practices of the Canaanites. And they were certain that the lost 10 tribes were amongst them. And there was a person called Antonio de Metazinos, who's also a Marano like Menasseh, and he went to the region of Ecuador sometime, say that at the time he was apparently sick, he was delirious, and he met a few Indians, Amerindians, and they spoke to him, and he understood they were speaking to him in Hebrew. We don't know how much Hebrew Antonio de Metazinos actually knew, but he was certain that they spoke to him in Hebrew. And then he came to the Netherlands, and he swore on a Sefer Torah, on the Torah scroll, that what he said was correct, and Manasseh was there. And this confirmed in the eyes of Manasseh the idea that lost 10 tribes were amongst the Amerindians.
Got the sound.
Were amongst the Amerindians, and this gave an added push to what he was going about. Somehow or other, he saw the discovery of who the lost 10 tribes were, together with the readmittance of the Jews to England, as all linked together, all linked to bring on the Messianic age. And he wrote a book. He wrote a book called The Hope of Israel. He wrote it in Spanish, then it was translated to Latin, then into English, 1650, and it's known as Hope of Israel. It's on the web. It's on the internet. You can see a full English translation of this work. Look it up on the internet. And this work of his, Hope of Israel, was published, and this shows Manasseh's beliefs. And Menasseh, in that book, he describes the case of the evidence, the witness of de Montezino having met these Indians and what other people had told him. And most of the book is concerned with that the lost 10 tribes are amongst Amerindians. But if you look in the work, he said he believes in Isaiah 11:11. Isaiah 11:11 lists places of exile, and Manasseh ben Yisrael understood these 11 places referring to lost 10 tribes. So he understood those lost 10 tribes had gone to these 11 places. And there's a list of these places, the names given are places known in the Bible, but they're not necessarily the same places. For instance, it mentions Egypt. Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. We have shown elsewhere the name Mitzrayim does usually mean Egypt as we know it, but in some cases it could refer to a place further to the north, possibly to Russia, and so too with the other areas. At all events, Menasseh decided these 8 places were places lost 10 tribes were too, and one of them, the Isles of the Sea, referred to America, and that the lost 10 tribes would return from America. And this is what he believed, and in his book, he brings biblical proofs, quoting biblical verses, that in the end times, the lost 10 tribes would return from America.
Yes.
And that interests us, because at that time, there was no one in America, hardly any white people in America. They set up a few colonies on the coast and so on. But now America has become a great nation, one of the greatest nations in the earth, and it's all the blessings of the earth. It's helping civilizing humanity, is helping our world today is thanks to America. America is the most important country. America fulfills many of the blessings associated with those 10 tribes in the Bible. The blessings given to Joshua, the blessings given to Israel have been fulfilled through America, at least in part. And we have evidence that the lost 10 tribes are to be found in America and will return from America. We also have indications from Midrash and so on that this is the case. Meanwhile, Menasseh ben Yisrael had said the same thing. In effect, said the lost 10 tribes would return from America. He thought he applied it to the Red Indians or the Indians of America. But the biblical passages that he quoted are pertinent, are correct. And not only that, he was a scholar in his own right. He not only was he interested in lost 10 tribes, he was interested in a lot of things. He wrote a book on life after death, and on reincarnation, and on other things. He also wrote a book on the Conciliator, bringing apparent contradictions, a big fat book, very interested, also available in English. And in this book, he brings passages from the Bible that appear superficially to contradict each other. Also from the rabbinical sources, all appear hard to believe or contradict each other. And he shows how that will fit together, and there's no real contradiction when you go deeply into it. This book was important. Also, other books were important. He himself was important. So if he says something, even now, after hundreds of years, it still has a certain respectability. And so we went to this book, and we went through it, and we checked it out, and we found additional evidence to what we already had regarding America. And not only that, we found confirmation for our own understanding of biblical verses as applying to America in the work of Menasseh. So this is important of his work to us. So I'll go through a portion of the book, and after that I'll ask questions and so on. And that's what we have. We also have articles on it, a long article on the subject. There's several articles in effect dealing with this matter. We just put out one, quite a long one, in detail, showing more of this. And that is what we'll do now. So first of all, he quotes from 2 Esdras, or 4 Esdras. Actually, Esdras is an apocryphic work. What's the apocryphia? Apocryphia were books possibly written by Jews. It's not known, not recognized by the Jewish sages, but they were religious books, possibly written by Jews, or by Jews who were, or even possibly by Christians, or people who belong to non-official streams in Jewish thought that existed at that time. We would call them sectarians, people who were not recognized, and they wrote this apocrypha, and they usually wrote in Greek. This Esdras is actually written in Latin, maybe a translation from a Greek original, we don't know. And Esdras purports to be an extension of the book of Ezra. The book of Ezra is found in the Bible, and Ezra claims to be an extension, a continuation of the book of Ezra, but it's not so. The book of Ezra was written in the 300s BCE, whereas the book of Esdras is believed to have been composed about between 70 to 218 CE. That is after in the Common Era, and it is recognized by Roman Catholics, some Protestants, most Eastern Orthodox Christians. It's not recognized by Jews, but even some passages here and there that might be of value. And Ezra, he quotes from it. All events, Menasseh ben Yisrael quotes from it. To Esdras 13, he says, those are the 10 tribes, to Esdras 13, verse 4. Those are the 10 tribes which are carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king. Salmanasseh, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters. Now, we too, found in the book of Amos, different passages and other sources, and biblical references that, in addition, where the Bible says those 10 tribes were taken away, it describes 3 stages of exile. First of all, probably east of the Jordan. After that, the northern Galilee. After that, the area of Samaria. That is what is found in the book of Kings and the book of Chronicles. But the indication that a section of the exiles were also taken overseas as part of the Assyrian attempt to expand its empire overseas and to set up colonies for mining valuable minerals and for agricultural imports. And they set up colonies in Spain. Archaeology confirms this. This is not something that archaeology confirms that at that time there were people in southeast Spain, up in the northwest Spain, people in southeast Spain who archaeological indications show that they came from the area of northern Israel, or associated with northern Syria, which northern Israelites were also in. And they too were there for a while, and we put together different sources and we show how from southeast Spain they moved to the southwest of Spain around the area of Gibraltar, and then they moved up into Galicia and the northwest Spain. From there they moved to Ireland and to Britain, possibly also to Brittany in France. And they linked up to people of Celtic culture who were also from the Lost Tribes. At all events, in this source he talks about Exodus being carried over the waters, so this helps us. This is a confirmation in its own right. And he says they came into another land, and in Hebrew that's how it's translated. Another land. The Latin original, it is Asaret. Asaret is believed to be derived from the Hebrew Eretz Aheret. Eretz Aheret meaning another land. It is mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy, where in the book of Deuteronomy 29:28, it says the Lord rooted them up out of their land in anger and in wrath and great indignation, cast them into another land as it is this day. And this verse in the Talmud, in the Sanhedrin, is the place of the lost 10 tribes according to the sages, Eretz Aheret. And Eretz Aheret in biblical Hebrew has the same meaning as New World. On our website, we explain a little bit linguistically why it is so. Eretz Aheret, another way of translating Eretz Aheret, means not only another land, it also means New World. A New World was a name applied at that time to the regions that have been recently discovered, including America. So this is important. Eretz Aheret means New World, and that is where the lost 10 tribes are supposed to be according to the Talmudic commentary. And the other verses in Deuteronomy 29, such as the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. And this too is connected with the lost 10 tribes, as we have shown. At all events, we have this passage in New World, Eretz Aheret, which Menasseh talks about. And Menasseh quotes Isaiah 60. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 9. It says, surely the islands shall wait for me, the ships of Tarshish first, to bring thy sons from afar, their silver and their gold, with the name of the Lord thy God, and the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified you. And this is referring to the lost 10 tribes. The ships of Tarshish are referring to ships that applied the Atlantic Ocean, as we have shown, as we previously showed in our researches and on our website. Ships of Tarshish, and this indicates the lost 10 tribes will return from ships connected with the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean connects between America and the Isles of Britain and North and Western Europe. So from this alone, can maybe suppose the lost 10 tribes must be in that region. And the word translated here as isles in Hebrew is iyam. Sometimes it's written as coastlands, and it can mean coastlands, but more correctly, it means, from a literal point of view, it means islands. And that is how Manasseh understood it. And then further on, he also quotes from Jeremiah 31:10, hear the word of the Lord of nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say he who scattered Israel will gather him, keep him as a shepherd does his flock. And so too we have in Psalms 97:1, the Lord reigns, let the earth rejoice. Let the multitudes of islands be glad. And Manasseh says this chosen lost 10 tribes are there, unknown, but present to this day in America. That's what Manasseh says. And Manasseh held that the lost 10 tribes had an idea based on previous writings. The lost 10 tribes somehow had gone into Tartaria. Tartaria was a known nation, another name for Scythia, and then they moved northwards. And then they moved around, and there were reports of the tribe of Naphtali and Naftan in that region. Ortelius at that time also wrote on this, and that they had crossed through the Bering Straits, with the area connecting Asia with North America, and had gone into America. And that too is what, more or less, is what present-day researchers also say, that the American Indians of America, they came from somewhere or other through Siberia, through the Bering Straits, into what is now Alaska, into Canada, and went on all the way down to throughout America. And that accounts for most of them in that region. And so too, he says the islands of the sea, he says concerning the expression isles of the sea, because also Isaiah 11:11, which he quotes, which says, first the remnant of his people left from Assyria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands of the sea. These are the 8 places that Menasseh said the lost tribes would be found in, but Menasseh concentrated on the islands of the sea, which he believed was to be represented by America. And he says, the islands of the sea, that is how it's translated. But, says Menasseh, I think it's a rendered the islands of the west. Well, Yam in Holy Scripture signifies the Western Hebrew of the word Yam, which is usually translated as meaning the West. And that is what it can mean, and Yam, the sea, was to the west of the land of Israel. But it can also mean the West in general. And so Manasseh said this is what it means. It means the lost tribes are, or at least a section of them are, in the West. And in many places, upon this account, those Israelites are employed who are westward from the Holy Land, among whom the Americans are. And so the Americans, the people of Americans, whoever they are, will contain amongst them lost tribes. And he says, he quotes Isaiah 11:2, and he shall set up a sign for the nations, in Isaiah 11:12, and he shall set up a sign for the nations, he shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together dispersed of Judah from the 4 quarters of the earth. And he notes that when the Israelites, term Israel is juxtaposed with Judah, the lost tribes are intended. This was accepted. And the lost tribes are people who will be assembled, they will be brought in, they were outcasts, but they stayed together more or less in concrete entities, whereas the Jews were dispersed. So when he says the dispersed of Judah, it's the outcasts of Israel, means lost tribes. And when he says the dispersed of Judah from the 4 corners of the earth, he means the Jews who are scattered everywhere. And he says also, the prophet in verse 7, the envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. And he says in the end times there shall be no contention, no quarrels, no disagreements between Judah and the 10 tribes. And the 10 tribes are referred to as Ephraim, because their first king was of that tribe, was from Ephraim. So too in Ezekiel 37:22, in the end days 1 king shall be king over them all. And there shall be no more 2 nations, neither shall be divided any more into 2 kingdoms. And he goes on, there shall be 1 king to them both, or the family of David. Also the Lord of the redemption will dry up the Nile and the Euphrates and split it into 7 streams. And he goes on as he thinks things will happen in the end times. At all events, they shall come, they shall return, and they shall come back from America. And he also says that they will return the second time, as proof that they had not returned from the exile of Babylon. Remember, they had lost tribes taken away by Assyrians. About a bit more than 100 years after that, the Babylonians conquered Judah, which had remained behind, and took all of Judah into exile to Babylon. And they were there. But after 70 years, they returned, or they began to return, and they set up a kingdom of Judah where it was. But the lost 10 tribes did not return. Nandis also speaks of this at length, proving that very few lost 10 tribes returned with them. And he discusses it and proves it from the Bible. And we have separate articles on this subject at all events. Menasseh says the same thing, that the second that we're in Isaiah 11:11, he speaks of lost 10 tribes returning, he speaks of them returning. The second time, but the first time is when they came out of Egypt, and the second time will be in the end times. And they did not return from Babylon because they weren't there in the first place. or very few of them were. The future redemption shall be universal to all the tribes, as it was when they went out of Egypt, when redemption shall be like the first in many things. Is Isaiah 43:5. Fear not, for I am with you. I'll bring your descendants from the east, and I'll gather you from the west. Or say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not keep them back. Bring my sons from afar, my daughters from the ends of the earth. There he says, Menasseh says, Europe is on the west from the Holy Land. When he says, bring my sons from afar, he understands America. But those verses are referring, when those verses, and I said, all the places when the tribes are detained. It is certain that Jeremiah sends to all their authors that when Judah is joined with Israel, by Israel, the 10 tribes are meant. And also, another point, Menasseh speaks of the Messiah, future son of Messiah, or Joseph, the Messiah, son of Joseph, who will come before the Messiah, son of David, and he will lead the 10 tribes, who will be a prince of the 10 tribes, and he repeats ideas or understandings concerning the Messiah, son of Joseph, leading the 10 tribes in the end times, and he has some detail about this, and this too is a valuable source. The valuable source is one of the earliest authors to go into detail on this matter, and it is quite impressive. We also have a couple of more points, and then we'll ask for comments. That they will fly back. The 10 tribes in the end times will fly back. In the time Isaiah Menasseh was talking in the 1600s, they didn't have airplanes at that time. They didn't believe that airplanes were possible, assumedly. And he quotes Isaiah 27. It says, Isaiah 27:13, shall be in that day the great trumpet, literally the great shofar. The great shofar will be blown. They will cut, there's ram's horn. The great ram's horn will be blown. They will come who are about to perish. The word to perish actually means those who were lost. Lost in tribes who were lost. They lost consciousness of their ancestry. They're not lost knowledge of who they were. And that is the understanding, is that correct translation of being lost.
Hello.
And it says,
hello.
They will come by the Mediterranean Sea to Alexandria in Egypt. And he also says the gathering together of the captivity shall begin at those who are in America. Therefore, Isaiah says, 69, surely the isles shall wait in me in Hebrew, and the ships of Tarshish first to bring those sons from far. As we said, the ships of Tarshish, ships supplying the Atlantic Ocean.
I didn't realize that the coverage start date.
Isaiah chapter 11. Isaiah chapter 11.
Yeah, says, 2 insurance companies for the same thing.
Who's?
It's Kitty.
And Kitty has got her mic on and she's on the phone. So Kitty, mute your mic.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Kitty, mute your mic.
Do what? What did you ask me to do?
Could you mute your mic?
Okay, look, I muted her. Okay, sorry. Sorry, Kitty, everyone will be back on a couple of minutes. Okay. Everyone's been muted, Kitty. No offense, no prejudice. I muted all of you. And I'll let you all talk in a minute. Okay. We'll just finish up here. Yeah, it's worth listening to. And he says, Isaiah 11, they shall walk after the Lord, they will roar like a lion when he roars, and such shall come trembling from the west. They shall come trembling like a bird from Egypt, like a dove from the land of Israel. Here too we have a reference to flying. They shall fly back. And let them dwell in their houses, says the Lord. And so too Isaiah 68 says, those who are these who fly like a cloud and like doves to their roosts, to their cots. Surely the isles meaning the lost in tribes, are to wait for them in the ships of Tarshish first. And so on. And we should also point out that Menasseh did not quote it, but we consider it important as the Midrash, Yalkut Shimoni, Psalm 60, and other sources, and where it says that the lost 10 tribes will return. And when they return, the half tribe of Manasseh, there's the Gilead, those who are east of the Jordan, will be the first to return. As it says in Psalms, Gilead is mine is Manasseh, and after that he gathers Ephraim. In other words, first shall come Manasseh, and then Ephraim. That is the Midrash, quoting from biblical verses. Another thing that Menasseh says, he says at length, he says that all these prophecies concerning the end times, we don't know when they will happen. He says there were great men in the past who tried to give dates and say certain things, and they're all wrong. And also it is forbidden. Biblical indications is it is forbidden to try and calculate when the Messiah will come. Moses said it's hidden. And Isaiah, this is Manasseh speaking. In Isaiah chapter 63, 4, for the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year in which the redemption will come. I have revealed it to my heart and not to angels. And elsewhere, if any man tells you when Messiah will come, believe him not. So that's what it says in the Talmud. Some say that the Messiah is coming, do not believe him. So also the angel said to Daniel, all things are closed up and sealed to the end of time. And he goes on and quoting all different famous rabbis and different sources who tried to predict when the Messiah would come, and they were all wrong. And they were all doing something that is not acceptable.